So you're interested in playing Dune Imperium, or you've been playing for a while, but you want to have a better shot at winning. Well, that's what I'm here for today. In this video, I want to explain the basic strategic principles of Dune Imperium that will help you win more often. I'm going to tell you about early game priorities, where to find victory points, tips for winning conflicts, when to use intrigue cards, and what cards to pick up from the Imperium row. If you've never played the game and you want to learn how to, check out my how to play video in the link below. If you enjoyed this video and you're into Dune Imperium, make sure you subscribe to the channel for lots more Dune Imperium stuff. We've got full playthroughs against other players online. We've got the challenge modes from the digital game. We've even got a 6-game tournament you can watch and plenty more to come. You can also follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/bludgeon, to watch me play live. Let's get started with early game priorities. Get your Swordmaster as soon as possible. Almost everything you do in Dune Imperium is done by sending an agent to a board space, collecting resources, getting troops, adding them to the conflict, getting intrigue cards, getting faction influence. All of that requires an agent. At the start of the game, you have 2 agents every round. Adding a third one increases your power by a huge amount. It's basically a 50% boost to your power. The earlier you can get your Swordmaster, the more rounds you're going to have to use it. And also, the later your opponents are going to be able to get theirs. Let me show you how you can get your Swordmaster as early as round 2 of the game. To do it, you're going to need to collect 8 Solari in 3 moves or less. So here are a few ways you can do it. Round 1, Wealth and Secure Contract. Round 2, Secure Contract, Swordmaster. Round 1, Still Suits to get the water, the Great Flat to get 3 spice. Round 2, Sell Melange, Swordmaster. Round 1, Wealth or Secure Contract, and Haga Basin in whatever order you can. Round 2, Sell Melange, Swordmaster. Also, keep an eye on the early conflicts. Picking up 2 or 3 Solari there is just as good as a visit to Wealth or Secure Contract. Any extra spice you can get will power up your Sell Melange. Or in the event that you get blocked there, it opens up the possibility of going to Conspire as a backup. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to get your Swordmaster on round 2 every game. It's going to depend a lot on the cards you draw. It's going to depend on the round order, what the other players decide to do. So it's something to aim for. It's not something to expect. Just be adaptable and get it at your first opportunity. Even if it's a few rounds later than you'd like, it's almost always still worth doing. It is possible to win the game without getting your Swordmaster at all, but in my experience, it's pretty rare. If you do sell Melange, sell it all, baby. Any extra Solari you have left over after getting your Swordmaster is going to go towards your next goal, which is getting your High Council seat. Once you have your High Council seat, it's going to provide you with 2 extra persuasion during your reveal turn every round for the rest of the game. That's going to help you acquire more powerful cards faster. So while the Swordmaster increases the quantity of your agent turns, the High Council is going to help you improve the quality of the cards in your deck, which in turn is going to make your agent and reveal turns stronger. Every time you send an agent, you need to play a card from your hand to do it, and ideally, you want to play cards that have bonus agent effects. Agent effects can give you resources, draw cards, provide troops, get you faction influence, sometimes even mess with your opponents. The sooner you can get these kinds of cards into your deck, the more chances you're going to have to use them, and the more value you'll be able to extract from each agent turn. More expensive cards can also provide resources on reveal, as well as help you win conflicts by boosting your combat strengths or through special surprise effects. They also tend to provide more persuasion, which makes for a kind of compounding effect. High Council seat helps you buy better cards, which help you buy better cards, including eventually the spice must flow. Also, just psychologically speaking, one of the worst feelings in Dune Imperium is when there's a really nice card sitting in the Imperium row that you just can't quite get because you don't have enough persuasion, and you have to just sadly watch as one of your opponents snatches it. In most games, you should prioritize getting your Swordmaster first because that extra agent is so important, and it'll help you get your High Council seat. But in some games, it can make sense to get the High Council first if it'll let you get a really powerful card that round. Or if you're getting blocked at Swordmaster for a few rounds in a row, you can grab the High Council as long as you're sure you're going to have enough Solari to get the Swordmaster when it becomes available. Now remember, the object of the game is to get more victory points than the other players. And to win, you're going to need at least 10. So let's talk about where these victory points are going to come from. The three main sources of victory points in the game are the faction tracks, the conflicts, and buying the Spice Must Flow. There are a couple other ways to get them, but this is what we're going to focus on. Prioritize sending your agents to faction spaces whenever you have the opportunity. Getting to 2 influence with a faction is worth 1 victory point. So if you can do that with each faction, that's 4 points right there. In a way, going to a faction space is worth half a victory point. If you're doing this consistently, you'll also have a shot at getting an alliance or 2, which is not only points for you, but it's victory points you're preventing your opponents from getting. So at the start of the round, when you're looking at the cards in your hand, if you see anything that can take you to a faction space, you should try to use it. Let's talk about conflicts. There are a lot of victory points potentially available in the conflicts throughout the game, but you're not going to be able to win them all. So it's all about picking your battles, finding the right time to commit to try to win a conflict, and knowing when to back off and let someone else take it. It's also important to keep in mind that troops are a limited resource, so you've got to try to use them wisely. All right, here are a few tips to keep in mind when it comes to conflicts. Conflicts are primarily won and lost with troops, so take a look at what everyone has available in their garrisons. If you have troops available and your opponents don't, this is a good opportunity to get something out of the conflict. To deploy troops to a conflict, you're going to need an agent and a combat space to go to. So pay attention to who has agents remaining, what combat spaces are left, and whether or not you think your opponents are likely to go there. Turn order matters a lot. If you have the final turn in the round, then that's going to give you a lot of intel to decide whether or not it's a good idea to throw in troops. On the other hand, if your opponents still have a few agents left after your final turn, it's pretty risky to commit. Swords gained from the reveal turn can often tip the balance of the conflict. So if you have a few cards that provide swords in your hand, that's an encouragement to participate, especially in the first 1 or 2 rounds of the game. If you have a hand with 2 daggers, that's going to give you a good chance at winning or at least placing highly in the conflict. Intrigue cards can be a big difference maker when it comes to winning conflicts, so make sure you're keeping an eye on how many everybody has. There are 3 levels of conflicts in Dune Imperium with escalating levels of rewards. The level 3 conflicts start in round 7, and they're really important because 3 out of 4 of them are worth 2 victory points for first place. That's a big deal and can often decide who wins or loses the game. The key to winning a big conflict is usually Hayliner. So you need to prepare by getting 6 spice together before round 7 comes around and making sure that you have a guild access card in your deck that can take you there. It also helps to have some troops in your garrison because sometimes the 5 troops from the Hayliner isn't enough. You want to be able to throw in as many as you can to win one of those big 2-point conflicts. Now, like I said, you're not going to be able to win every conflict, but sometimes throwing in 1 or 2 troops at the right time can get great value out of 2nd or 3rd place, so keep an eye out for those opportunities. All right, let's talk about intrigue cards. When it comes to combat intrigue cards, if you see a chance where you can use an intrigue card to win you a conflict or even give you a good chance at doing it, you probably should, even if it's not necessarily the most valuable conflict. Sometimes it's easy to get into a trap of kind of wanting to hold on to them and wait for the right time when you can win a 2-point conflict. But the reality is a lot of the time it's going to be actually hard to find a good time to use them where it's actually going to work. So if you see a chance where playing a combat intrigue will get you something meaningful or even just take something away from someone else, you should probably do it. Now, if you're holding on to Alliance Armada, then maybe you want to hang on to it for a really pivotal conflict. Remember that if you ever have more than 3 intrigue cards in your hand, you're vulnerable to getting one randomly stolen from you by someone visiting secrets. So you really don't want your hand clogged up with combat intrigues that you can't easily get rid of. You can only play combat intrigues during the combat phase and only if you have troops deployed to the conflict. Plot intrigues, on the other hand, are usually easier to get rid of when you need to because you can play them anytime on your agent or reveal turns. It's generally a good idea not to play them unless you're either getting an immediate benefit or you're in danger of going over 3 intrigues because that way you keep your opponents guessing. Let's look at Water Peddlers Union as an example. Good players will always be paying attention to their opponent's resources and using that information to decide which spaces to prioritize. For example, let's say I really want to pick up that load of spice that's sitting on the Great Flats, but I also want to make good use of my diplomacy this round. Well, I see that my opponents all only have 1 water, so I figure, let me use my diplomacy now and come to the Great Flats during my next agent turn. Then on your turn, you ruin all my plans by playing that Water Peddlers Union you've been holding on to, beating me to the Great Flats, and stealing all of my precious spice. The final main way to get victory points in the game is buying the Spice Must Flow. Now this one is pretty straightforward. You're going to need 9 persuasion, so you're probably going to need a high council seat. You're going to need a lot of cards in your deck that give you a reasonable amount of persuasion, and you're probably going to need to draw cards. So cards that have draw cards on agent ability or visiting spaces that draw you cards are going to be important for actually buying it. Research Station is the big one, but Selective Breeding, Mentat, and Arakeen can also help a lot. Now, when should you buy a Spice Must Flow? Well, basically, if you've already used all your agents and it's your reveal turn and you have 9 persuasion, you should probably buy it. There are times when maybe buying a Kwisatz Haderach or a Chom Directorship or even a power play might be better if it's early enough in the game or if the directorship is going to get you a couple of points right off the bat. But a guaranteed victory point that you cannot lose is extremely valuable. Now, sometimes it may be worth early revealing and actually skipping a couple of agent turns to get it, but that's usually not going to be worth it because sending those agents out to those spaces is probably going to be worth more most of the time, but it's something you're going to have to play by ear. Some games you're going to end up with a lot of points from buying Spice Must Flow. Some games you might end up with none. It's going to depend on the game, but these are the things to keep in mind. Now, when you don't have 9 persuasion, what should you buy? Let's talk about buying cards from the Imperium row. This is a big part of the game, and we can look at it through the lens of everything we've talked about so far. Priority number 1, faction access. Like I said before, there are a lot of victory points sitting in those faction spaces, but to get them, you're going to need cards that can take you there. In your starting deck, you only have a Seek Allies, which you can use once, and a Diplomacy, which you're only going to see every once in a while. So you need to add more cards into your deck that can take you to those faction spaces to get you those victory points and hopefully even an alliance or two. The best card for this, of course, is Power Play. This is probably the strongest card in the game, all things considered. It can take you to any faction space, and it gets you 2 influence instead of 1 when you use it. Yeah, it trashes itself, so you only get to use it once, but getting 2 influence in 1 turn is incredible. It's usually worth at least 1 victory point, but sometimes it's a great way to steal an alliance from somebody, and so it's +1 for you, -1 for somebody else. Always buy Power Play. There are also cards that will get you faction influence without taking you to faction spaces, and those can be a big deal as well. The biggest one here, of course, is Chom Directorship, which gets you 1 influence with every faction when you buy it. It's kind of crazy. It can sometimes be worth 4 victory points. Another important one is Shifting Allegiances. With this card, you can spend 2 spice to lose an influence with a faction and gain 2 with a faction. And if you want, you can do it with the same faction as long as you do have an influence to lose. So you can just net go up 1 somewhere. But if you've got an influence that you don't need somewhere else or that you can get back easily, it's a way to jump up 2 somewhere to get you a victory point or steal an alliance. It can be a very powerful card. In terms of your next priorities after faction access and influence, it's really going to depend on the game you're playing. If you're trying to get Spice Must Flow, then obviously you're going to want to add persuasion and cards that draw cards into your deck. Sometimes you might not care so much about that, and you might be focused more on trying to win conflicts, having powerful agent effects, or swords on reveal. You're just going to have to play it by ear. There are 2 cards in the game that will actually let you buy a victory point directly for resources when you reveal the card. These can be great, especially if you get them early enough to trigger them more than once. Even just once is enough, but I've seen some players get an early opulence and get like 3 or 4 points in 1 game out of it. Generally speaking, versatility is a virtue. Big cards like Kwisatz Haderach, Jessica Atreides, Reverend Mother Mohiam, Thufir Hawat. These cards are going to help you every time you draw them, no matter what. But also smaller cards like Space Travel or Bene Gesserit's Sister are going to help you somehow. Now keep in mind that the more cards you add to your deck, the less often you're going to draw your best stuff. So you don't just want to flood it with everything that you can afford. Every buy needs to be intentional. Is this card advancing me towards my goals? Does it fit in with the rest of my deck? Or would I be better off just with a slightly higher chance of drawing my diplomacy? By the same principle, trashing the weakest cards out of your deck increases the chances of getting your powerful stuff. So if you can get cards into your deck that trash very early in the game, that can pay off nicely. Also, it just helps to keep the mindset that trashing is not a cost, it's a benefit. All right, well, that just about covers everything that I wanted to say about the fundamental strategy of Dune Imperium. I do want to stress that this is an incredibly well-designed and nuanced game. There are many ways to play and many ways to win. You should definitely feel free to experiment. See what happens if you skip the High Council seat and Swordmaster altogether. Try out some Imperium cards that you've been ignoring and just give them a shot. Just because a strategy doesn't work in one game doesn't mean you should totally write it off. I've played probably 100 games at this point, and I still feel like I have a lot to learn. I do have one more piece of advice though, and it's really important, and that is never give up. This is a game that can change quickly. You might be really far behind. I've played lots of games where I was sitting on 1 victory point, other players were at 4, 5, or 6, and I still managed to win. Always play to your outs. Things can change. Other players can have bad luck too, and you want to make sure that you're ready to win in case that opportunity does present itself. Of course, you're probably going to lose more games than you win. It's a 3 or 4 player game. That's just how it goes. But try your best until the very end, and you will win more games that way, and you'll have more fun. All right, well, I really hope that this video was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments what you liked about it, if you think I left anything out, and I'd be really curious to hear how your own thinking about Dune strategy evolves as you play. Of course, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, tune into one of my live streams on YouTube or Twitch to say hello. All right, thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Take care.